it's Brooke Werner here, and I'm back with my final overview of the class. We're going to be going over everything that we learned in the course, what I took from each module specifically, especially with the different types of exceptionalities, what we should look out for as teachers to diagnose them, to help teach our students the different means of doing so. Just basically everything that I found important about this course. I will say that I took a lot from this course, more than I have probably any other education course. I really took an interest in learning about all the different types of exceptionalities and learning how the stereotypes that I've learned in the past may have not fit them quite as well. And it's really interesting to see it from a teacher's perspective. I really enjoyed the module videos too, especially just because it gave you more insight on the subjects, and I got to actually see how these students think, how they feel, and how they learn the best. So let's just dive right into the different modules. But first things first, I want to talk about the Universal Design for Learning. It's basically a framework that we educators are to follow that specifies different teachings for your different students. Obviously, no student can learn the same way as every other student. We have to change our methods to benefit the students the best way possible. We can't just assume that every student's going to learn at the same pace, that they're striving for the same goals in life. We have to really look at the students individually and do what's best to educate them and lead them on the path for success. In Module 1, we basically learned about exceptionalities and just kind of the different programs that are put into place for students with disabilities or students who are gifted. We learned about IDEA, IEPs, 504 plans. These are all very different, and before going into this course, I didn't really know the terminology for the different programs and plans that were put into place for students who needed them. So it was very interesting to learn about those. It's definitely important to learn about it. Even though we might not all be paraprofessionals, we might not all be working directly with students with disabilities or gifted students, it's good that we have an understanding of these different plans in place so that we as educators can pass it on to our students, this information, and we can pass it on to parents and other teachers in our partnerships. And speaking of partnerships, that's what Module 2 is about. It's just about the teacher having to be connected with the community, with other teachers, with the school, and especially with parents. With students that have exceptionalities, disabilities, who are gifted, it's especially important to be connected to those parents because at home, we can't really control what's going on, but the parents can. If we know what the student needs, or if we're learning that they benefit more from time with parents with help on their homework and such, it is good to pass forward that information. It is also good to have that support as teachers from the parents to know that we are doing well with the students and seeing that they have progress at home. They're happier, they're feeling like they understand the material better. They come home proud of what they have achieved in class. Partnerships are just always a good thing, whether you have exceptional students or not, just especially so if you do. Module 3, we learned about all exceptionalities. We especially learned about lesson planning for different types of students. We have to remember to keep in mind different teaching strategies. Maybe one child might not learn at the same pace as another. Maybe they need certain hands-on learning skills or visuals more than another student would. And it's good that we really switch it up and we don't do the same thing, and we make sure we monitor all of our different students to make sure that they're catching on. And if they aren't, that might be the time when we have to pull them aside. We might give them their own special education, or we might try and get them more enthusiastic in the work with their peers. Of course, we can always pair peers together and they help each other out a lot. That's one of my favorite methods for helping a student, is to pair someone who might be struggling with someone who is very advanced in their education because they will feed off of each other. The advanced student will learn how to teach and work with and socialize with the student who is falling behind, whereas the student who is falling behind will have that peer member who they can relate to that is teaching them. For Module 4, we learned about learning disabilities and language and social disorders. This is the module where we created a social story, which was my favorite assignment of the year. I like it just because it has that creative element, and for younger kids, it would especially get them kind of, when they see that social story, it's easier to connect with. Those visuals, I think, are really helpful, and they can be as simple as complicated as you need them to be. I also enjoyed the language and social disorders just because I mentioned that I have someone that I'm very close to who has a language speech disorder, stuttering. It was interesting to learn about that from a different perspective. And it's very common. Module 5 was the module that we did a project on ADHD. It's really interesting to understand what ADHD versus actually delving into the disorder and learning more and more about it. Doing an in-depth project about it was a lot more, I guess, beneficial for me to learn about the disorder than it was just to, I suppose, read an article about it. I learned that it's taken in many different ways. Sometimes it's not even considered a disorder. Sometimes, as we learned in the last module, that kind of cutting back on a student's positive style of learning, be it ADHD, where they're really focused on certain things and have a hard time focusing on other things, medicating them or taking that, I guess, attention away from them is almost worse than letting them, I guess, feel what they have to feel. And as you can see, I chose this picture of a student being medicated because I do stand behind medication, but at the same time, if it's numbing our students' feelings, their ability to learn, they aren't going to come to the classroom quite as ecstatic and excited as they might be if they felt like they could be themselves in the classroom and felt like they were able to learn with their peers without any sort of, I guess, modifications to their way of thinking. Module 6, we learned about different types of intellectual disabilities, specifically Down syndrome, autism, Asperger's, and I found this module again very interesting. I actually have a great aunt who has Down syndrome, and it is true that while these, I guess, students that may have intellectual disabilities struggle in certain subjects, they can also be very focused and very determined and smart and positive in other subjects. If you've ever met someone with Down syndrome, usually they have this mindset of a very young child, but at the same time, they have the most positive attitude that could put you in the best mood possible. So it was just really heartwarming to watch some of those videos about these exceptionalities and these people who really strive to do their best, even with these, I guess, weights on their back. Oops. Module 7, we learned about traumatic brain injury and hearing loss. This was an interesting module because unlike the last one where it was more, I guess, defects or learning disabilities based on sometimes birth or an accusation of it, Module 7 is more about a either gradual loss of being able to be educated quite as well, or it is a sudden disability based on a traumatic event that has happened. We learned that there are different parts of your brain that control different areas of your movement and thinking, and so based on where you were injured, that could also affect your disability. We learned about hearing aids, and I found it really interesting to hear through a hearing aid because I never understood just kind of how unclear it was to actually listen through one of those. Anyway, whether it's progressive disability or inability to learn quite as well as your peers, or if it's sudden from birth, it still needs to be taken notice of, and we need to be looking out for these sort of things. Those were also kind of some disabilities that are harder to see from the outside, such as Down syndrome or even autism, where you'll see specifically in the actions, it can be a little bit harder to catch on to that traumatic brain injury or hearing loss. A student might go through school without even realizing that they are hard of hearing, other than they won't hear from far away, but they might just not think anything of it. It's important for us educators to look out for that as well as the students. Module 8 I titled Old School because this entire module was basically about changing the way that we think, changing the way that we educate, because the school system is very old-fashioned. It hasn't changed a whole lot besides the inclusion of technology. The way that we teach students is all very similar to how it has been done in the past. We teach in large groups, we separate different ages, and sometimes even the genders are separated in the classroom. And it just kind of asks the question, why? Which is very interesting because as teachers, we always look at how our past educators have done things. We always think, well, this is how it always has been done. This is what I need to learn how to do. But if you really consider it, there are new methods that we could be using that might help benefit the students to be educated quicker, easier, that really fits their way of learning. So we shouldn't be stuck in an old school way of thinking. We should really move on from that and just do the best of our ability to teach our students, whether it be individually or as a group. We just really need to focus on getting them to where they need to be and beyond if possible. So anyway, that's all I really have for this presentation. I just want to say that I really enjoyed this class and I feel like I took a lot from it. I especially love learning about the different exceptionalities. I didn't really know all that much about autism and even Down syndrome. Knowing someone who has Down syndrome, I feel like I was a bit higher on the level of understanding than someone who hadn't been, but even still researching it, seeing these videos about other people with Down syndrome, I realized just how different the cases are, how varied they are from person to person. Even if two students might have ADHD, that two students might have a certain exceptionality, they're going to be very different and they're going to be taught very different. They're going to learn on different bases. They may be able to focus in different ways. It's just something that we always have to keep in mind. So anyway, that's just basically what I took from this, is we just have to stick with the universal design for learning, educate all our peers fairly and to the best of our ability. So thank you for watching, and I hope you all have a great summer.